So in this video, I use spring helpers in an attempt to get my oversized tires to stop rubbing in the tire wells of my 2016 Honda Fit. To get started on this project, I wanted to take a couple measurements from my car. The first measurement I wanted was the actual gap between the tire and the wheel well. That way I can compare it later to see if my lift actually did do anything. The second measurement I wanted was, with the car parked on a nice level area, measure the distance between two of the coils. This will give you your compressed spring measurement. Next, you'll want to jack up the car, preferably the whole axle, that way the sway bar doesn't compress the spring on the side you're measuring. You'll want to measure the distance between the coils again with the car off the ground. You just have to jack it up enough so the tires don't touch. This measurement should be larger than your first measurement, and this is your uncompressed spring measurement. The last thing you want to do is count the number of coils on your spring. On my car it was a nice even 4 coils, but I'm sure there's cars out there with half coils, and just guesstimate the best you can. So today I'm working on my 2016 Honda Fit. I bought these used snow tires and rims, 185/65/15. The OE are 185/60/15. So that makes these 0.8 inches taller in diameter, but it makes this clearance supposedly about 0.4 inches smaller. So on bumps, in particular, it seems to be grabbing this little nubby right here, and I'm sure on bigger bumps it would rub even more. Probably turning makes it worse because that puts the tire further out this way. So the correct thing to do is, of course, buy the correct size tire. Up here in the north we got quite a bit of snow, and I was hoping that if I could give myself more clearance, that would help me as far as ground clearance and making these not rub, so it'd be a 2-for-1 advantage. The first thing I did was I measured the distance between these coils when it's down like this. I have somewhere around 1.5 inches, probably a little bit less, of clearance when they're compressed, and I have about 2 inches when I jack it up. If you're using the spring helpers for the same reason I am, my rule of thumb ended up being that you should buy the biggest spring helper that'll fit in between your uncompressed coils, and that'll give you the most lift without doubling up on spring helpers. So in my situation, my tire size was big, so this is just a conversion between tire sizes, but the new snow tires I put on my car were 0.36 inches less of a gap between the tire and the fender, and so it was rubbing on a little part of the fender. So I wanted to lift it, and here's where your measurements come in. I had 4 coils on the front. It was only rubbing in the front, so I only wanted to lift the front. When it was compressed, it was about 1.4 inches between coils. When it was jacked up, there was about 2.25 inches between coils. So this is the theoretical spring height. It's probably not right at all, but it's for these calculations, it's what we need. And then this is just how long it would be normally, but that's not important. So the idea is, I had a choice between 1.6 inch spacers, spring helpers, and 2.2 inch spring helpers. When I unboxed the 2.2 inch ones, because that's what I decided on, I found out that they're actually only like 2 inches, so I assumed that the 1.6 are about 1.4. The extra 1/10 of an inch on each end is from the lips on it. So it doesn't measure quite how they say it does, so the 2.2 is actually a 2-inch lift. This is just in case you were thinking of putting more than one spacer in to lift it more, because you theoretically can put as many spacers in as you have coils, but it's going to really stiffen up your ride. It's going to be like filling your tires at 60 psi and driving down the road. It's going to be uncomfortable. You also don't want to lift it too much because you can screw up your suspension geometry and probably wear out your tires. So I was going for the absolute minimum lift that would get the job done. So this is the spring height from over here, the original spring height, and this is with the theoretical 1.6 inch. I can't vouch by these numbers, I never bought them, so I don't know. But if it truly is 0.2 inches shorter, just like the 2-inch were, then you're not actually gaining anything per coil because they're 1.4 already, so once it settles down, it won't actually do any work until maybe you start hitting bumps, and then it might give you a little bit of extra support. But the 2-inch, that gives you an extra 0.6 per coil basically. So, and that comes through down here. So basically the calculation, these are all assuming that the spacers are perfectly solid, which they're not. They're a little soft, so they're going to compress a little bit. But basically it takes this calculation takes the number of coils left, so in this case it would be 3 left that don't have the spacers, and multiplies it by the original amount of space between them, and then it assumes that the final gap is a solid 2 inches, so that raises you 0.6, which you see down here. If you were just putting these in and weren't trying to oversize your tires, this would actually lift your car that 0.6 inches. In my case, since the tires already are 0.36 inches approximately, they're adding that much ground clearance already, so with this it actually gives me almost an inch lift for the front. That's not actually what I'm going for, I just bought a cheap set of tires. But just an idea. I'm sure you can find spacers with different heights, but let's say I wanted a little more space, so I wanted to put 2 of them on each spring in the front. Now I get a 1.2 inch lift, and with the tires I'm up to 1.56. So the tools you'll most likely need for this job is required for sure is a jack, and preferably a jack stand. You don't need to remove the tire on most vehicles to do this, you just have to jack it up. I have a knife because sometimes you have to trim these. These ones I don't have to on this car, but you might need to trim a little bit off so because you don't want them overlap. I'll try to tell you about that when I'm doing it. But mostly I need this knife to open the package, a tape measure to show that you're actually doing something, and then I brought out some soap because as you work them in, on some vehicles it might be tighter than this, but on my vehicle you can basically pop them right in. So I'm going to switch to jacking it up. Though at a minimum you should set your parking brake in the back. So you have to jack it up just so the tire is just off the ground. Should be able to move the tire. Go ahead and give the car a bit of a shake test. I'm going to be underneath it. I'm going to open the packaging. There's more tips about opening the packaging because I would have wanted to return it, but now that I know they fit, I'm going to be careful. In the package, you get this split rubber ring. Has kind of an
H profile. Has 2 holes. These are for zip ties. My plan is to put them in like this, zip tie them around the bottom coil. I don't think it matters whether you zip tie it down here to the coil underneath or whether you zip tie it up above to the coil above it, especially if it's a tight fit. But I'll show you now what I mean in a couple of things. So here's that measurement I was talking about with it up on the jack. You can see that somewhere like a little under 2 1/4, depending on how you measure it. So these are 2.2, so they should be like the exact right fit for this, and it turns out that they are. So idea is to take this split and you start it on the coil springs. These are actually kind of loose. They'll actually basically just pop right into place. But the idea is you feed them around like this. Once you start them, and then you can move them back and forth wherever you want them. For the most effect, you want to get them way down at the bottom where it wedges. So I changed my mind. I'm gonna flip this over so the zip ties do zip to the top, because I want to push it all the way down near the spring seat. That way I can't really move anywhere further down, because I assume gravity would help this move down. But I'll flip it over so these are up on top. That way, because over here you can't zip tie it to the bottom. So the idea for the soap is I was going to put it in these grooves, top and bottom, so it would slip easier. Maybe even along this edge, so it would slip in easier. Obviously I didn't need to do that. And then you just rotate it into place. When I said you might need to cut these, they're not supposed to overlap. From my research, over 1 inch. Preferably they'd be just like this. I believe these are for a 5-inch diameter spring, which is from this, I guess from over here to over there, if you can measure that. Which, that seems about right. So the idea is you get them in here, you get them in there loose, then you take your zip tie. These zip ties are bent the wrong way. Let's see. So you shove it in the hole and grab the inside end. And these are, I would call these insurance, because obviously now it can't go anywhere. So on mine, like I said, these are 2-inch blocks, and when you let this car down, it's like 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches, so it squeezes these right in there. I believe it's 2.2 inches from the inside of the groove, so this should be taller. Okay, it isn't. So that explains a little bit of why it's so easy to get them in, because these are about 2.2 inches altogether, even with the flange. So it's probably only like a 2-inch maybe even less of a block between the spring coils. So get the second zip tie in there. The baffled boot makes it hard. So I got the second zip tie. These basically just make it so it's impossible for these to fall out on the road or something, because mostly these are going to be held in place by the friction, because obviously you can still move on the spring, but they can't actually leave the car now with the zip ties. I have spare zip ties, so I'm going to cut these right now, because if I screwed up something, it's not, I got zip ties to redo it, but I wouldn't worry too much about screwing it up. Seems pretty easy. I will probably post an update on these after I drive them all winter, but my goal here is I'm gonna put them all the way down on the bottom, and then I'm hoping that that'll give me a little extra spring, because down here, after it gets flat, it'll give me more effectiveness than up here, because when these squeeze together, I'll be squeezing on that. But this, if I move it all the way down, it actually starts off tight, is basically what I'm going for. Push too much down, I have slack. There we go. So, like I said, you want the ends to be pretty close to even. They won't interfere with each other that way. So that's it. Basically just shove them in place. Probably on your car, shoving them in place will be the hardest part. You shove them in place. Make sure that they don't overlap too much. Make sure that they should take up almost all that space. But I'm gonna hopefully slowly let the jack down so you can see. So they still loose in there. I haven't let the jack all the way down. The jack's all the way down. I might be able to move these if I really tried, but so now they're tied in there. They're zip tied. What were these, 2.5 when I started? So like I said, when I did the other side, it affected this side. So we were at about 2.5. Now I'm at about 2 3/4. Maybe even a little bit more. That's about an inch lift. Because let's see over here. I think I was above the V when I took my initial picture. So yeah, lifted about lifts about 1/4 inch per side. I'm not a suspension geometry guy. I can't explain. Seems like if you lifted one side, oh, it's probably the sway bar. So the sway bar probably transfers it. I might want to get 2 for the back, so you can see that it is a little bit higher in the front than the back. You should probably get an alignment after you do this. because it's going to affect some of it. So in this particular car, it could affect all three a little bit, but mostly it's going to affect the camber and maybe a little bit of the caster, but mostly the camber. Quick eyeball, because it's only an inch, but looks like it's a little different from the back. But it might be, can't be too far off. But I'll see how these tires wear. Like I said, I'll try to give an update. But it definitely lifted it. I believe it was originally 2 3/8, and now it's 2 3/4, so a little over half an inch. But I think it will. I'm not really looking for a lifted look. I'm mostly looking for it not to bottom out. And I think that'll play a big difference when you hit bumps, because those that bottom coil basically won't compress because they're in the way. So the spring will start compressing up here, which is probably about a quarter of all the spring compression. So this will probably tighten up it'll feel like every bump's a little worse than it is, but it should fix my problem. So I am just trying to see where it landed on the spring down here, but that's all there is to it. You just do that on both sides, and like I said, the hardest part's probably shoving the thing in, and I'll let you guys know in the future.
We've driven the car about 1,000 miles since I did this to it. The scraping problem isn't completely fixed, but it's much better according to my girlfriend, who drives it most of the time. However, any gains we made as far as static lift are basically gone. The passenger side is maybe 1/8 of an inch higher than it was before, and the driver's side seems to have settled just about back to where it was before. So if you're trying to lift your car with these, you'd probably need to stack them on top of each other, and that would just ruin your ride quality. So if you want a functional lift, you should probably go with something else like coilovers. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope this information helps you out.